Let's explore some key takeaways from this week's readings and videos on first arrivals and Paleo-Indians. We'll begin by discussing the arrival of the first Native Americans in the North American continent. Native Americans have their own origin stories about the first peoples. Origin stories, if you recall, are myths describing the origin of features of the natural or social worlds. Some of these describe the creation of the world. Others describe the origin of events in the natural world or the emergence of human institutions. And there are parallels to Native American origin stories with Christian stories, for example, describing the first people, such as Adam and Eve, and a great flood with Noah and his ark being good parallels between the Christian tradition, the Judeo-Christian tradition, and Native American origin stories. Indigenous peoples throughout the Western Hemisphere talk of their origins as a people. They use oral histories, stories, and myths, linking them intimately to the places they inhabit. Land, according to most of these origin stories, was made for the people, and they were made to inhabit the land. Every group has its own origin stories. These vary widely and are unique to different groups. Let's review a few historical dates and dating conventions. BC and CE stand for Before Common Era and Common Era, respectively. They coincide exactly with the older BC AD system, so 300 BC would be the same as 300 BCE, and 1976 AD would be 1976 CE. BP, we may use a few times in this course, stands for Before Present. This indicates years ago or years before the present time. It's most commonly used by archaeologists regarding carbon dating. Radiocarbon dating is a method of determining the age of organic materials by measuring the amount of radioactive decay of carbon-14 in organic material. Carbon-14 decays at a constant rate, so knowing the amount of decay can provide accurate information about the age of an object. Radiocarbon dating helps date organic remains like wood or bones from archaeological sites. The Bering land bridge model is the predominant theory about how the first peoples came to North America. During the last ice age, ranging from 50,000 to 10,000 years before the present, humans began to migrate from Siberia to Alaska. They crossed over this land bridge between the continents that was caused by dropping sea levels as massive glaciers formed all over the world. As many as 4 distinct major migrations occurred over this land bridge between 10,000 and 14,000 BP. Peoples migrated from Siberia, Eurasia, and coastal Asia, following the megafauna of the Pleistocene era. Clovis Culture is named for the archaeological site at which it was first identified in Clovis, New Mexico. Clovis peoples were long considered by archaeologists and scholars to be the first people to inhabit the Americas. Archaeologists have held that Clovis peoples came over the land bridge and down a glacier pass to the east of the Rocky Mountains between 12,000 and 11,000 BCE, and they eventually spread through much of North America. There is a competing, or at least possibly complementary, coastal migration theory that some peoples arrived in the Americas via sea travel. The rich marine environment along coasts would have supported maritime peoples very well. Travel by boat would have also been much faster and easier than the route over land. This would allow peoples to spread throughout the Americas much more quickly than strictly by land. Life for the first arrivals in the Americas was challenging, to say the least. The first peoples in the Americas were hunter-gatherers who obtained food by foraging, such as collecting wild plants and following herds of wild animals. The earliest humans in the Americas may also have been primarily scavengers who survived by eating animals that had died naturally. There were also great dangers from predators such as bears, wolves, and saber-toothed tigers. Let's turn next to our review of Paleo-Indian cultures. Paleo-Indians were the first major culture group to arrive and form in the Americas. The word paleo comes from the Greek language meaning ancient, and they occupied the Americas for between 10,000 and as many as 40,000 years, according to some scholars. By comparison, this is a longer period of time than for all cultures that came afterward combined. So this is a massive and lengthy period of human existence. There's relatively small amount of archaeological evidence of the Paleo-Indians, and the evidence that exists is mostly fragments. So archaeologists and historians have many challenges in piecing together this history. Sites in present-day Alaska are where some of the earliest evidence has been found of Paleo-Indian culture. Then this fits naturally with the Beringia land bridge hypothesis. These sites can also be found in northern British Columbia, in western Alberta, and in the Yukon. Paleo-Indians were primarily nomadic hunter-gatherers. They moved frequently, hunting the big game of the Paleolithic era, which we would today call the megafauna. This would be creatures such as the mammoth, the mastodon, the short-faced bear. There were also giant versions of animals such as the sloth, the moose, and the giant beaver. They also hunted animals like the glyptodon pictured on this slide. And of course, these peoples would naturally have practiced scavenging in order to survive at times when herds or even individual animals were not available for kill. There's quite a variety in technological forms in the Paleo-Indian cultures. For example, the knapped or chipped stone tools, such as scrapers, knives, and projectile points, like the Clovis point that we've talked about. Spear was the most common weapon, and later Paleo-Indians developed lighter throwing spears that used a device to propel the spear much farther, which is known as the addle-addle. The basic social unit in Paleo-Indian cultures was the family. Part of this is naturally biological in origin. Advanced mammals raise their offspring within some form of family structure. Family structures also provide greater security for the group and the ability to combine resources. The next level up would be bands, which are groups of families or extended families. Typically in Paleo-Indian culture, at least, they are in the 100 to 150 people range. This allowed for a fairly simple leadership structure, probably with one individual at the head of the group. This was an effective means of controlling members, although somewhat dictatorial by present-day standards, and allowed for movement of the group without much difficulty. Kin and marriage ties linked one band with others. Other features related to this involve the sharing of resources, generally equal status between members of the group, flexibility in work roles, such as a father raising children in the event of the death of the children's mother. In many, but not all, of these groups, Paleo-Indian cultures, women appear to have a somewhat inferior status. In some cases, they appear to have even been sold like commodities while in other settings they seem to have had greater influence over the band. By the 1950s, Clovis Points began to define the Paleo-Indian era in North America for many scholars. Anthropologists regarded Clovis culture as first and firmly established it as proof of human presence in the Americas. The Clovis-First hypothesis held sway throughout much of the 20th century. Pictured here are some Clovis points discovered at an archaeological site in Iowa. There are a number of challenges to the Clovis-First theory. One of the sites that first seriously challenged the Clovis-First model was the Monteverde site in Chile, which produced well-documented dates between 14,800 years BP and 13,800 years BP, much earlier than the Clovis model and not featuring elements of the Clovis technology. Another would be the Vero Man site in Florida, which was occupied sometime between 13,000 and 20,000 BP. And that brings an end to our brief review of this week's course content.